Hey, it's the Midnight Narrator here. Before we tuck into this one, do me a favor, like the video and subscribe so I can keep whispering you to sleep. Let's go. I didn't move to Millbrook to be found. That was the whole point. I took the long road in, a silver ribbon curling through the Vermont hills, leaves damp from a soft rain that kept deciding to come back in spite of the sun. The moving truck tailed me like a patient animal, engine heat fluttering across the guardrail grasses. I told myself I'd get a few months of quiet, let the divorce finish, echoing through me, and maybe relearn the size of my own life. The house waited on a little rise where the road kinked and dropped toward the town. A modest Victorian, gingerbread trim, a porch that had sagged into a smile, windows that seemed to blink. The listing said, cozy, which in real estate means your elbows will meet at corners. But this one wasn't so small. It was humane. Stairs that creaked on the second and fifth step, a front parlor of soft light, wallpaper whose roses had faded into memory. The agent swore I was lucky. Quick closing, under market. I signed everything in a blur and told myself I'd earned luck. I stepped from the car and the air hit me with damp pine and that faint metallic smell of a coming storm. A woman stood in the yard as if she'd risen out of the tiger lilies, hands full of condensation slick cups. "You must be Marcus," she sang like she'd been practicing. "Welcome to Millbrook. I'm Carol Brennan, next door with the green shutters that could use repainting. Lemonade?" I took the cup, cool against my palm. "Hi, thanks." She was in her 50s, hair in a practical braid, a blue cardigan buttoned wrong by one, the kind of small mistake that made her more trustworthy. "We've all been buzzing," she said, "hoping you'd arrive before the cookies got stale." She nodded toward my porch, where a tin of something waited like an offering. More people found the yard as if it were a magnet. A couple from across the street, Tom and Diane, bringing folding chairs. A teenager with a shy wave. A man in a straw hat who introduced himself as the mayor, though I thought he was joking until he pressed a card into my hand. Everyone knew my name the way you know your own family, fondly, with a little relief. I kept smiling. I kept saying, "That's so kind. And yes, I'm settling in, and no, I don't need anything right now," while the moving truck sighed at the curb and the clouds thought about crying. Tom lifted a box labeled kitchen before I could get there and carried it through my door. Diane set the folding chairs on the porch like she'd been instructed by a playbill. By the time I found my keys, the house had more footsteps than I'd planned. "It's just easier if we all pitch in," Carol said, pushing the door with her hip. "Tight-knit, but you'll get used to it. Could I get a copy of your spare for emergencies? Locks are tricky here." "I'll be careful," I said light, almost joking. "Let me get my bearings first." She laughed as if I'd told a joke we both knew the ending to. "We'll see," she said, and pointed me toward the cookies, oatmeal raisin, the honest kind, already sitting in my kitchen like a verdict. That first night, I stood on the porch with the tin in my hands and listened. You can hear a lot in a small town when you stop moving. A dog correcting the night, a far train like someone dragging a thumb across a comb, the steady hush of trees. Somewhere a chime counted the hour in thin, glassy notes, and in the broken cloud I saw my own windows reflected in the dark. It should have been peace. It was almost peace. A question hung in the air like damp laundry waiting to be taken down. I slept with the bedroom door open, just in case the house wanted to say anything. Title: The Kindness of Neighbors. Chapter 2. Cookies That Arrange Themselves. I woke to the smell of coffee that wasn't mine. The house held its breath while I listened. Faint clink, a cupboard easing shut, a soft tut from someone deciding where a mug should live. I sat up, thinking I'd dreamt the voice last night that said this town could be peace if I let it. The floor felt cool. My phone said 712. I hadn't given anyone a key. "Marcus," Carol called, gentle as a shawl. "Don't be alarmed." The word alarmed came with its opposite strapped to it like a parachute. I pulled on a t-shirt and went down to find her in my kitchen, sleeves rolled, a tea towel over one shoulder. The room had been rearranged into a better version of itself. My mismatched spices stood at attention in a tidy riser, pans nested, a new sponge waited like a friendly animal by the sink. She had already decided where my mugs should live. Second shelf, left of the window, handles turned the same way like neighborhood watch. "Good morning," she said brightly, reading my face and choosing to ignore the part of it that wanted to be alone. "The realtor left copies with me. Safety protocol. We all do that here. I hope it's all right. You were out of milk, but I brought some. Whole. Your bones will thank you. I appreciate the help." It came out soft because she was so careful with the towel and because the coffee smelled like welcome. I would have liked to text. You hadn't given me your number yet. She smiled in a way that made me scold myself for being ungracious. Consider this a head start. By 10, Tom and Diane had waved from the curb and come in on the wave, leaving a small potted fern on the dining room radiator. A boy from 3 houses down, Evan, with a cowlick that had ambitions, shuffled a folder toward me. "School fundraiser," he said, and Diane added, "Only if you'd like," which made only feel like an open palm pressed to my chest. I worked at the card table that first day because the proper desk was still in pieces. Slack blinked, my code editor glowed, and between commits I met 11 people in slow motion. Each of them offered me something with one hand while quietly rearranging my life with the other. A borrowed ladder already leaning against the porch, a bag of apples with a recipe attached in tidy cursive, a directory with my name already written in the margin as if I'd been here all along. Their names were simple and good. Nora, with the freckled nose, Pastor Mills in a sweater the color of oatmeal, Mr. Ortega, whose knees clicked on the steps. I said thank you, until a word felt like gum, losing its flavor. That night, I set my own mug in the second shelf spot Carol had chosen, then moved it to the first shelf, just to see if I could. The house did not scold me for it, but the movement felt like nudging a painting off-center, daring someone to fix it. The second morning, the door knocked itself open at 8, and Carol appeared with a casserole I'd heard about only in myths. Noodles like soft rope, mushrooms the size of coins, cheese that surrendered without a fight. She set it down and looked at me. "You left the porch light on late," she said, worried. "Do you have trouble sleeping?" "I'm still getting used to the sounds." I tried to smile around the admission. "The train and the chimes," she said, as if we were naming stars together. "We'll get you settled. I put your colander by the sink. It didn't belong under the stove." The third morning, I took a shower with the bathroom window cracked and heard footsteps humming through the house like a well-known song. I stepped out, dripping, a towel around my waist, and called, "Hello?" The footsteps paused, then Carol's voice floated apologetic. "I brought eggs. I should have knocked more loudly." She looked truly sorry when I met her in the hall, cheeks pink, eyes wet with embarrassment. "Forgive me. In Millbrook, we sometimes forget people need their own perimeter. We're just so happy you're here." She caught sight of the damp towel and looked away. "I'll put these in the fridge and go." "It's okay," I said, because the alternative felt like pushing a child off a swing. "Next time, a text." "I have your number now," she said, relieved. "Thank you for reminding me." By evening, the porch held 3 pie tins and a loaf of bread wrapped in waxed paper with a bow. A note on the bread read, "Welcome home." Beneath the words, a wooden key lay lashed with twine, hand-carved, my address etched in little block letters along the shaft. It was pretty, useless, and somehow heavier than its weight. I pressed it into my palm until the indent stung, and for a moment I imagined a small brass bowl in a museum labeled "Token of Belonging," 19th to 21st century, used to soothe arrivals into place. When I went to bed, I set the wooden key on the nightstand, where it watched me like a quiet eye. Sleep came shallow and warm, and somewhere in the night the wind teased the chimes again, counting hours I hadn't asked it to count. The house sighed in its bones. I had the thought, clear as a bell struck once, "I am being held." The thought wasn't unkind. That's what unsettled me. Chapter 3. Optional Attendance. By Friday, the town reached a kind of cruising altitude with me, a soft circling that never gained or lost height. On the way to the market, 3 strangers said, "Marcus," with the ease of cousins. At the register, the cashier, a knit-capped woman with a pale pink scar on her lip, slid a melon across the scanner and said, "You're coming Sunday," as if I already knew which Sunday and to what. "Coming to town meeting," she said, tapping the paper sack like a gavel. "Technically optional." She didn't wink. She didn't need to. An hour later, Mayor Philip Gaines, who wore his hat like a signature, rang the bell on my porch and handed me an envelope thick with paper. "Welcome basket phase 2, he said. "Directory, emergency numbers, calendar. We take care of our own." The calendar was a quilt of obligations dressed as invitations. Monday knitting, Tuesday cleanup, Wednesday night choir, no experience necessary, Thursday pancake breakfast, Friday teen game night, volunteers needed, Saturday food drive, Sunday meeting at the Grange, then potluck in the yard. Only 2 squares that month were blank. Someone had filled them by hand. Neighborhood walk, apple picking. I glanced up. That's robust. Philip smiled into the brim of his hat. "People miss community and don't know they miss it. We fixed that. 6 o'clock Sunday, you'll love it." "I'll try." "Good man," he said, as if I had already said yes. He pointed with the envelope toward the wooden key still on my hall table. "Nice work, isn't it? Evan's grandfather carves those, for addresses that matter." At 6 on Sunday, I took the walk, because not going felt like stepping out of a dance and breaking the rhythm for everyone else. The Grange smelled faintly of lemons and old wood. I counted 70 heads and felt others count me. A woman in a floral dress adjusted the microphone, and it squealed like a scolded thing, then quieted. "We have a new friend," she said, "Marcus Webb." They applauded. It wasn't thunderous, it was gentle, but complete. I raised a hand, a little boy's wave. Carol beamed at me from the front row. Tom and Diane lifted their chins. I became aware of my shirt, the way it had creased in the car, the single dog hair clinging to the hem. Where had that even come from? They gave me a second basket afterward, batteries, a flashlight, a list of back roads numbered in pencil with comments like "slick in spring" and "shade here stays icy." Carol slipped another key into my palm. Real brass this time, not wooden. "Back door," she whispered, like we were sharing a secret. "In case you ever forget the front." At the potluck, plates appeared in my hands and were filled for me before I could object. "Try Nora's beans," someone said, and "oh, he needs pastor's corn pudding," and "save room for Diane's lemon bars," until my plate became a geographical survey of local affection. I sat with my knees beside a stranger's knees and let the noise run over me like a river. People asked questions that required easy answers. Where are you from? What kind of software? Do you hike? Do you sleep with a fan? When I said I liked trains, 3 people nodded like I'd revealed a noble cause. "Mr. Aldridge loved trains," someone said, and I turned to see an older man with a face like polished walnut. He tossed the name out as casually as a comment about weather. "Used to stand in his yard and count the cars." He smiled approvingly at my empty plate. "You're eating? Good." I didn't ask about Mr. Aldridge because the silence that followed his name felt practiced, as if a curtain had been installed there and they drew it with 2 fingers whenever a newcomer reached for it. But the name lodged anyway, a burr under the sock. I went home with a casserole I hadn't earned and a promise to join the cleanup day if I wasn't swamped. My porch light had been turned on for me in the dusk. It made a little halo where moths wrote their invisible letters on the air. Inside, the wooden key lay where I'd left it, and the brass one was warm from my palm. I stood a long time with one in each hand. I realized, embarrassed, that I was waiting to feel something clear, welcome or warning, simple as a light switch. All I felt was the odd relief of being expected and the equal pressure of it. Before bed, I moved my mug back to Carol's chosen shelf. It was a small concession that looked like gratitude. The chimes counted 11. When I turned off the lamp, the dark felt friendly and entirely awake. Chapter 4. Boundaries with bows. Work wanted a version of me with sharper edges and fewer interruptions. Millbrook wanted the opposite, a version with soft corners that fit their rooms. Monday morning began with a knock that was really a question. "Do you have a minute?" Tom asked, standing on the porch with a tool belt and a look at my fence that said he and the fence had already agreed. I noticed the slat by the lilac. "Wobbly. I can fix it." "You don't have to," I said, and by noon it was done. An invoice refused, a favor planted like a flag. At 1, Diane texted a photo of the repaired slat with a heart. At 2, my manager asked in a chat if I had the logging fix for the authentication flow. At 2:05, Carol arrived with a paper plate hat of cookies and said, "We're thinking Sunday supper at our place. Unless you'd be happier hosting, we want a break in that nice yard of yours." I said, "Let's do the Brennans." But she put a hand on my wrist and made her face cave slightly in apologetic concern. "We've actually all sort of told people. You'll hardly notice. We'll bring everything. You just open the gate and enjoy. Unless that's selfish of us." "It's fine," I said, and it wasn't not fine. That was the slippery part. There wasn't a villain, only the room rearranging itself around me until the old outline made no sense. The project missed its Tuesday milestone while I adjusted chairs for people I'd met that week. They brought their own lanterns, their own folding tables, their own children who explored my house like a museum of someone else's choices. Laughter watered the grass. Carol cried a little when I looked uncertain, and I heard myself say, "Thank you," as if she were the one offering peace to me. "Marcus!" shouted Pastor Mills from the grill. Smoke made his eyes softer. "Diane says you're the computer whisperer. We've had such trouble with the church Wi-Fi, those poor youth group kids. Would you mind when you have a moment?" "Of course," I said, and a moment became Saturday morning with a ladder against the choir loft and a password that had been set to Millbrook 123. Tom's son Aiden stood below with a notebook. "My science fair project, could you maybe look at my code? I'm stuck. They say you're the best." "Who says that?" "Everybody," he said matter-of-factly, "and if a 12-year-old tells you a town says something, you believe him." By Wednesday, my phone dinged with a rhythm I started to anticipate. Nora's printer, eaten by a mysterious driver update. The hardware store's point-of-sale terminal sulking. The school's laptops hatching a new form of mischief. I became the person you called when a thing that promised to help you refused to do so. That would have been fine if the promise hadn't included all of me. The monitoring began as a kindness, neighbors waving when I jogged, someone texting to say, "Saw you forgot your umbrella," when clouds were thinking about mischief. Then it hardened into a daily ledger kept in hands that smelled of flour and fertilizer. "You were up late," Mrs. Chen said on her morning walk, not unkind. "We worry." "You're ordering too much takeout," Mr. Ortega observed, patting his belly. "Not good for the heart." One afternoon I came home to find a basket of groceries by the door and a note in Carol's compact script. "Stocked you up. Whole grains, sugars, a trickster." The fridge had rearranged itself again. My sauces lined up like well-behaved soldiers, a Tupperware brigade of prepared meals labeled with days of the week. She'd left the key on the counter, as if to say, "Look, no secrets." On the kitchen table, my work notebook had moved from the left side to the right, a bookmark I'd been using replaced with a ribbon. I practiced saying, "I need more privacy," in the mirror, and the mirror practiced looking skeptical in return. When I tried it on Carol, she packed emotion into a tiny trembling nod that made me feel like a man refusing water to a village. "Of course," she said, tears collecting in the lower lids with perfect patience and not falling. "We forget ourselves sometimes." Then she reached for the laundry basket by my stairs. "Just let me finish this load and I'll go." At the end of the week, a card with the town seal arrived. "Grateful for your contributions, Marcus." Inside were signatures that curled like vines. There was also a schedule, cleanup day, bake sale, choir practice, where my name appeared in pencil next to items I hadn't volunteered for. When I looked closer, I saw faint eraser goats under other names, as if I'd been slotted in where the community's organism needed a new cell. Sunday at church, even though I don't go to church, Pastor Mills put a hand on my shoulder and said, "You're adjusting beautifully." He meant it as a benediction. I took it as a report card. Afterward, the potluck long table glowed with glass casseroles, and people worked the line in a pattern that had no single conductor, but held together like a song everyone had known since childhood. "Mr. Aldridge always came to these," someone murmured fondly. The burr under the sock bristled. That night, when the chimes counted 10, I stood in the kitchen and moved my mug to a third place, neither mine nor Carol's, above the stove, on a hook, where I had to reach for it. It felt, in a ridiculous way, like a declaration. I choose height. I choose inconvenience. I choose a little muscle every morning to get what's mine. The house did not applaud. The town slept or practiced sleeping. The wooden key on the nightstand warmed in the moonlight like a small tame moon. I lay in bed and listened to the wind nudge the trees and thought, it's not malice. That might be easier. It's more like ivy. Ivy kisses you while it takes the shape of your walls. Title: The Kindness of Neighbors. Chapter 5. A guest feels the draft. Sarah's first message arrived like a window opening, a simple, "Hey, liked your hiking photos? I'm in Burlington if you ever want company that doesn't know your houseplants by their first names." We traded small confessions, her new remote job, my new remote town, and a week later she said she could come down Saturday, bring croissants from a place that believed in butter the way some people believe in angels. I told no one. That felt important. A small boundary with a ribbon tied tight. Saturday wore a clean shirt mood of hope. I swept the porch, put the wooden key in a drawer, and set out 2 mugs high on the hook, where reaching felt like a choice. The chimes counted noon in a shy way, as if a sound could keep a secret. When her car pulled up, a blue hatchback that sounded like a well-meaning bee, I felt my chest find a shape it hadn't in months. She was real in the good ways. Hair that didn't always do as told, laugh that turned sideways at the end, a small crack in one thumbnail from some earlier task that had fought back. "So this is Millbrook," she said, breath turning white in the cool. "Looks like a postcard that forgot it's not 1985. "Welcome to the Museum of Gentle Intentions," I said, and she smiled, and it felt possible to be funny again. We ate croissants on the porch and let flakes make a small snowfall on our plates. The street was quiet. I let myself believe in privacy until a shadow crossed the fence like a sundial's hand. Carol stood at the gate with a casserole pan hugged to her chest like a baby. "Oh," she said, "a friend." "This is Sarah," I said, trying not to sound like I was seeking permission. "She brought contraband pastry." Carol laughed, genuinely delighted, then tilted her head with that slight ache in it. "I brought breakfast for you both," she said, and lifted the lid to show scrambled eggs with a bravery of chives. "I worried you'd be hungry." "We're fine," I said, softer than I meant. "We had fresh eggs, save your heart," she said, stepping through the gate as if the hinges had asked her to. "And it's nice to meet you, Sarah. We're neighbors. The Brennan house. Any friend of Marcus is a friend to us." Sarah stood, polite smile on, the way people do when someone else's relative is crying over a birthday cake. "Nice to meet you," she said, and traded a glance with me I hoped Carol wouldn't see. "Are you okay with this? Do you want me to be the bad cop?" More footsteps came like weather. Diane and Tom with flowers that still had soil on them, the pastor with a book he claimed was for lending, Nora with a paper bag of cookies. They didn't stay, not all at once, but they drifted through in a current, each with a reason to be exactly where they were now briefly. By the time the pastry flakes had gone stale, everyone happening by knew Sarah's name, her job, a summary of the road conditions on Route 2, and the approximate length of her stay. At the diner that evening, A bell rang when we walked in. The cook glanced up over the pass, then down again. Service was polite the way a kept lawn is polite. Trimmed, edged, no stray blooms. The waitress filled our waters to the same meniscus each time, then forgot to ask about dessert. A couple in the corner stared as if trying to place Sarah in a family tree they kept on their fridge. When I reached for her hand, I could feel the flinch she tried to hide. In the car, she let the quiet grow until it had something to lean on. "I like you," she said, "a lot, strangely quickly, but..." She pointed past the windshield at the town like a teacher, indicating the problem on the board. "This place makes me feel collected and not in a good way." "They're just proud of their kindness," I said, and heard the defense as if I were reading it from a brochure, pressed into my palm. "Kindness with a ledger," she said. "I know what that feels like. I left a version of that. I won't go back." She stayed the night. We lay in the dark and listened to the chimes mark 1 o'clock. 1 note, waiting. 2 o'clock. 2 notes, patient. When I got up for water, I saw a figure pause on the sidewalk and look toward the house, then continue, not sneaking, not spying, simply performing a duty that had no obvious name. In the morning, Carol's Tupperware lid clicked open like a throat clearing. "I made too much," she said through the back door screen. "It'll go to waste." Sarah stood behind me, her face polite and distant, a guest in a room with its own gravity. "No, thank you," she said gently, and I felt absurdly as if I were the host of a small war. After she left, the town relaxed on its haunches like a dog who has heard a car door close and can rest again. Carol brought me a pie and said, "She seemed sweet, not quite our rhythm," and pressed my forearm with the softness of a towel. I washed the mugs and put them back on the hook, then took them down again because I didn't like how exposed they looked, and set them on the second shelf as if muttering an apology to no one. That night I lay awake and catalogued the ways a place can hold you that feel like holding up. I told myself I was exaggerating. I told myself exaggerated people don't sleep. I didn't sleep. Chapter 6. Notes in the margins work doesn't punish you all at once. It keeps a list in pencil, then goes over it in ink. The week after Sarah visited, a calendar invite bloomed at noon. Performance check-in. Just a chat. The exclamation point felt like a sweater pulled too tight. I arranged the shots so the camera captured my good wall, the one with the framed map of the northeast corridor, and nothing else. I smoothed my hair, muted the Chimes app I'd downloaded in an act of homesick mimicry, then unmuted it again because the quiet made my ears ring. When my manager appeared in the small window, her smile was real, her concern rehearsed. "You've missed 2 deadlines," she said gently. "That's not you." "I know," I said. "It's been a transition." "We want you to have what you need," she said, and I recognized the sentence as a cousin of Carol's. "But we need your attention back. Is the environment conducive?" I opened my mouth to say yes when the back door clicked like a very polite metronome. Carol stepped through the kitchen with a laundry basket, saw the camera, and froze as if I were a deer and she'd become a car. "Oh, honey," she mouthed, and skittered back, but not before the camera grabbed a sliver of her cardigan and the basket's rounded edge. My manager paused. "She's in San Francisco. She keeps plants alive in North Light. She's compassionate. None of that mattered. Is that your roommate?" "Neighbor," I said. "We do communal chores." The call went softer after that, as if we were putting blankets over sharp corners. A document arrived later with the words Performance Improvement Plan, and the line items made reasonable requests of a person with a gate on his life. Protect focus, avoid non-work obligations during core hours, commit to calendar blocks. I signed it and touched the page where my name looked like someone else's. When I told Carol I needed the house to be a house during business hours, her face did that thing again where sorrow arranged itself like a set table. "Of course," she said, "of course." She left the laundry basket by the stairs and went home, and by evening the town knew I had raised my voice. No one said I had. They said, "We heard you were stressed, and it's a hard world, and we forgive short tempers, and we know you didn't mean to hurt Carol." Warmth cooled. The wave that met me on my runs went missing, replaced by a consideration that measured me like a package at the post office. The clerk at the store took my money and looked through me to the next customer. On the sidewalk, conversations paused and then continued with the same words, rearranged. A delegation came after supper, as if assembling the way birds do on a wire. The mayor, Pastor Mills, Tom with his hands in his jacket pockets, as if to show he'd brought no tools, nothing that could fix this, except whichever words he kept like nails in his tongue. They sat at my table. No one touched the casserole Carol had sent with them, its lid fogged by heat. The mayor folded his hat in his lap. "We're a forgiving town," he said. "I didn't do anything unforgivable," I said, and heard how defensive sounds even to your own ears when the room is decided. "No, you didn't," said Pastor Mills, soothing. "But we have a way. We protect our way together. Carol keeps our fabric soft. We honor that." Tom cleared his throat. "It would mean a lot if you'd say something at meeting, just to clear the air." "You want me to apologize?" "We want to make sure the stitch doesn't run," the pastor said. "We've seen how a little snag becomes a tear." I said yes, because it was easier than arguing over a metaphor. At the Grange that Sunday, I stood at the microphone and said words I drafted on a half-slept night. "I value the warmth here. I've been adjusting poorly. I'm grateful. I'll try to be more open." When I sat, Carol stood and dabbed a tissue to her eyes, then came to hug me. The applause rose like a weather system that had always known it would bring rain. Warmth returned. The wave came back on my runs. The clerk at the store asked, "How's your week?" And I gave an answer that fit in a pocket. You would think that kind of acceptance would feel like relief. It felt like a well-made right again, and me at the bottom of it, looking up at the ring of faces and the sky over their shoulders. I worked better, briefly, then not. The PIP hung on my screen like a small cloud. I closed it and opened it and closed it. At night, the chimes tallied my hours. I stayed up to listen to them because I wanted to own something about the night. Chapter 7. Paper Bridges. Richard Aldridge, I told the post office clerk in the next town over, one of those places where the stamp display is also a local museum exhibit. Forwarded mail keeps landing at my place. I just want to make sure it gets where it should. She looked through me first, habit, and then at the letters. "Yeah," she said, "he was in here a while back. Wanted everything moved right now. Kept checking his shoulder like a nervous sparrow." She slid one letter back across the counter with a finger to the return address. "He wanted a different P.O. box, but these folks said to send it here, She shrugged. I'm not from Millbrook. I just know it's easier if you don't get involved. Easier if you don't get involved is the lullaby of the bystander. I took the letters and went to the library in the neighboring town because Millbrook's librarian had begun to greet me with, "Oh, good, you can look at the modem." And I wanted to look at the past instead. Old newspapers have a smell like basements, learning to be paper again. I fed quarters, cranked glass, and watched names move across years with that slow majesty of glaciers. The house, I found it in a 1987 real estate section, a dotted line picture with a caption calling it a charming Victorian with strong bones. Owners came and went in a pattern I wanted to call coincidence and couldn't. 2, 3, 5 years. Quick closings, pleasant quotes and farewell columns about new opportunities closer to family. In the same year as the house listing, I found a short piece. Local resident Thomas Kern relocates suddenly, leaves no forwarding address. The article had a small photo. Man at a picnic table, smile pressed like wax onto his face, eyes that didn't know how to match it. Beside it, a column of quotes, neighbors expressing concern at his rude departure, puzzlement at his recent isolation. The words kind and ungrateful played tug-of-war in the syntax. I copied names into my notebook. The librarian looked up once to ask if I wanted the good pencils. "They make sharper notes," she said. I declined, and her face carried that subtle disappointment some people reserve for those who choose decaf. On the way back, I stopped at the real estate office in the next town, a glass-fronted place with a ficus that had ambitions. The agent who'd sold my house had given me keys with a smile that reminded me of a dentist praising flossing. This woman wore the same smile, but when I asked about Aldridge, it dimmed. "He sold under value," she said, glancing at the wall as if someone might appear there. "He wanted out." Did he say why? "People move for reasons," she said. "Sometimes the reasons are everything all at once." Did he go to Florida? She smiled again, the professional kind. If he did, I hope he found sun. At home, the wooden key on my nightstand looked like a bookmark in a book someone else had asked me to finish. I opened my laptop and went looking for Aldridge in the places people leave crumbs: social media, alumni pages, obituaries, nothing complete. A Richard in Boston mentioned a shelter in a thread about mental health resources. A comment under a photo of a train suggested someone who loved counting cars. I made a list in my notebook, then a second list of my lists, the way you do when you want life to have rows and columns that make sense. The town directory lay under my elbow, patient. My name was there in printed letters now, not pencil. I traced it once, as if I could smudge it back. The next morning, Mrs. Chen mentioned in passing that she'd seen a light in my kitchen at 2. "Everything okay?" she asked, the question folded into the tone you use for the weather. "Everything's fine," I said, and for the first time I felt the small electric spark of anger that never quite turns itself into fire. I carried it all day like a coin in my shoe. Chapter 8. The Phone Tree. I called Sarah on a Thursday because Thursdays seem to promise second chances. "Come down," I asked, and tried to keep the hope out of the cracks in my voice. I was not brave enough last time. I want to be brave. Also, I owe you a proper dinner, somewhere that doesn't water the iced tea out of principle. She said yes. When we hung up, I put on a song from the year I learned to drive and cleaned the house with a zeal that would have made Carol proud if it hadn't been my own. I hid the wooden key again. I put the mugs back on the hook. Reach, choose, reach. Saturday morning she called from a parking lot, judging by the gulls arguing in the background. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice had that glassiness meaningful apologies get. "I can't." "What happened?" A pause. "People called me from your town. I don't know how they got my number. They were kind. They were so kind I felt rude not listening." "What did they say?" "That you're fragile, that you need stability, that outsiders make it hard for you, that you're trying to be better." They weren't cruel, Marcus. They sounded like kindergarten teachers rehearsing for a pageant about compassion. She breathed out slowly. "They asked me to give you time, to let you find your footing. They made me feel like visiting would be an act of vandalism. I didn't ask them to call." "I know," she said, and I appreciated that she meant it. "It's not about you asking. It's that they think they're allowed to ask me." "Are you done?" I need clear air," she said. "I hope you find some too." The line went quiet, then smaller, then gone. I stood with my phone in my hand like it had become an object I didn't know the purpose of. On the porch, the street performed its normal. A boy on a bike, two women in animated agreement about zucchini, a dog carrying itself like a small mare. I walked to Carol's without planning to. She sat on her porch with a mending basket, needle catching the afternoon like a minnow. "Did you call Sarah?" I asked. I heard how it sounded, an accusation in slippers. Carol looked up, honest confusion widening her eyes. "We were just concerned," she said. "She didn't seem right for us. I mean, for you." She bit the thread and tucked it. "She didn't love our rhythm. That's all right. You'll find someone who does." "It's not a rhythm, Carol," I said, and the word broke in my throat. "It's a net." She considered that, then shook her head, kind. "Nets catch people before they drown." I went home and locked the door and sat on the floor with my back against it, not because I thought anyone would come in, but because I wanted the handle pressing into my shoulder as a reminder that I could block a thing if I had to. The chimes counted 6. Someone laughed 2 houses down. I pressed my palm flat against the wood. It was cool. It could keep cool forever. Title: The Kindness of Neighbors. Chapter 9. Listings that Wouldn't Stick. The night after Sarah said no with love in it, I walked my rooms and said yes to something else. I would leave. The word arrived quiet as a moth, and then beat its wings until it sounded like a plan. I opened the laptop and composed an email that made escape look like a career move, relocation opportunity, a change of scene, and sent it to the agent in town with the practice plants. She replied in minutes, as if she slept in her office chair. "We can list immediately. Strong interest these days." The house posed for photos like a child wanting to please. The afternoon sun powdered itself along the banister. The kitchen became a catalog. Even the chimes cooperated, letting their thin notes be a soundtrack without drawing focus. The listing went up on a Thursday. By Friday, an offer appeared with a subject line that made my stomach press against my ribs. Ready to move fast. I told no one. I told everyone by accident. On the sidewalk, the mayor lifted his hat brim and placed the conversation on the table like bread. "Heard you're in conversations," he said, as if I were courting a university. "Good to keep options open." His smile held. Don't make rash decisions." "Just seeing what's possible," I said, and the phrase left a chalk taste in my mouth. The first buyer scheduled a walkthrough for Saturday. That morning, a car I didn't recognize rolled past the house, slowed, and continued. Two women paused at my fence and admired the lilacs with the studied interest of people waiting for a bus. The buyers came at 2. I watched them from the parlor while my agent walked them through, her voice carrying little slices of the past. Strong bones, good light, quiet street. The couple looked like anyone. I wanted them to be anyone. When they left, they waved to Carol, who had happened to be gardening at the property line. On Sunday, the offer withdrew. After visiting the neighborhood, we're choosing a different area, the email said with professional regret. The second offer also blew in quickly, like a weather system, and blew out. We loved the house, but the third wrote nothing at all. The agent called, voice careful. They changed their minds. It happens. Carol brought banana bread that afternoon and set it on the hall table near the wooden key. "Change is hard," she said. Her eyes were soft with choir practice. "We just hope you don't change away from us. We've given you so much. You've given back." I folded the bread into foil and watched the porch light flick on unasked as dusk lifted out of the grass. In the mailbox, an envelope from my realtor sat like a shrug. Market reflections, strategy notes. Inside, a post-it in the looping hand I already recognized from bake sale sign-ups. "Let's keep communication simple. I'll reach out when there's movement." She signed only her first name, as if removing formality could keep me from leaving. That evening, at the Grange, they announced the pancake breakfast. In the same breath, they announced the new committee for welcoming transitions. I was not named, but people glanced at me in 2s and 3s, then quickly looked away. The chimes counted 9. In the hallway afterward, Pastor Mills said, "Sometimes the first idea isn't the truest one." He meant stay. He always meant stay. The fourth offer fell through after their drive-through town visit. The fifth never materialized because the agent got busy. When I rang, her assistant answered and apologized for the delay with a tone that suggested this was my impatience, not their inertia. I hung up and listened to the chimes sing 10 notes that felt longer than they had the week before. I started putting cash aside in the old-fashioned way, not because I had a timetable, but because ritual becomes a boat when you don't know how to swim. I stashed the money where no one would be gentle with it, inside a bag of dry beans, behind a row of books, under the false bottom of a florist's box. The house learned my hiding places the way a house learns your favorite step. Carol found me one morning looking at the for sale sign as if it had insulted me. "The right buyer finds the right house," she said. "Sometimes we have to make sure it's not the wrong buyer." "What does that mean?" I asked. She smiled, tidy. "Some people don't thrive here. We care about that." She smoothed the hair above my ear without thinking. Only afterward did she look startled at herself. "Habit," she said. "My daughter's age. I forget." I wanted to lean into the palm anyway. I wanted, with a longing that embarrassed me, to be held without being kept. Chapter 10. Work without a door. The PIP asked for focus and quiet. The town asked for sermons and signs. Wednesday at 10, the school called because the computer lab had become a disorganized galaxy. Wednesday at 10:30, my manager pinged, "Stand up in 5. Wednesday at 10:32, the doorbell rang like a polite emergency, and a voice called, cheerfully, "Just 2 minutes." I toggled between worlds so often the switcher in my brain burned out. The code didn't compile the way it used to. My logic tripped over itself, edge cases refusing to sit. I made lists nested inside lists until they turned into empty boxes. When I snapped at a support rep in a chat, I watched the words leave me and felt ashamed on their journey. He was kind back in the way training manuals teach you. "Let's take a breath," he typed. I did, and it didn't help. On Thursday, I stared into the small sonogram window of a video call while my manager, gentle still, explained that the team needed someone who could be all the way there. "We can revisit in a quarter," she said. "We'll keep your badge warm." She meant kindly. Not now. Possibly not again. I nodded as if agreeing to a haircut. After the call, I stood at the sink with the water running and my hands idle under it because the sound filled the room in a way I could handle. Carol knocked, then let herself in as if responding to a law of physics. She held a casserole and a hope. "I heard," she said. "How did you—" "We're networked," she said, apologetic but firm. "This is terrible, and also, now you can rest. Be here." The town came with job offers wrapped in napkins, a few hours shelving at the library, quiet work, good for people who think. A couple mornings at the hardware store, minding the register when Mr. Ortega's knees weren't friendly. The school IT room, which was 3 carts and a box fan. "It doesn't pay like the computer world," Diane admitted, "but everyone carries the basket together. It turns light." I took the school hours because kids look at you with their whole faces. They brought me machines with sticker constellations and asked for miracles. And when I showed them where the hidden switch lived or why the router needed a nap, they acted like I'd conjured. In that room, I could breathe. The problem was the gravity outside it, which insisted on orbit. At home, a note appeared on my fridge in Carol's compact hand, timetable for the week's shared responsibilities. "I'll handle dinners. Tom's got your fence until payday. Nora's on grocery rotation," it read, as if I were a long-term guest who had finally admitted he was staying. A second note, clipped to my calendar, read, "Bake sale sign-up. Web page needs updating. Marcus." The parenthetical patted me on the head. I found myself saying, "Thank you," with a tone that sounded like surrender. When I slept, I dreamt of rooms with doors that had been painted shut, the brush strokes neat and even. I woke calm because the dreams were tidy and uneasy, because tidiness has edges you can cut yourself on. On Saturday, while I fixed the choir Wi-Fi by angling the router away from a crucifix that seemed to be absorbing the signal, Pastor Mills leaned on the rail and said, "Sometimes God answers prayers sideways." "I wasn't praying," I said, and he smiled kindly. "Better yet," he said. No preconceptions. Chapter 11. The math that wouldn't add. On Monday, my car made a small embarrassed cough and the dash lit up like a Christmas pageant. I drove it to the town mechanic, who wore a baseball cap that suggested he'd rather be fishing. He lifted the hood and made the sounds of a man translating bad news into manageable portions. "These hoses," he said, "this belt, these tires are dangerous." He said dangerous with affection, like a coach. "We'll take care of you." The estimate was the kind of number that makes you sit down, so I didn't look at it in the shop. I nodded and took the paper home to let it age on the table. By dinner, Tom appeared, coincidentally passing with a coil of rope. "Saw your hood up earlier," he said. "Don't worry about the bill. We'll get you squared away. Payment plan. Neighbors, don't let neighbors spin out." My bank app showed a series of small withdrawals that were not mine. Dime-sized nibbles, a mouse at a loaf. I called the bank. The woman on the phone in a distant city used soothing words and escalated me to someone who used firmer ones. "We'll look into it," she said. "Keep an eye on your accounts." I tried to, but eyes don't stop anything. They only watch. A week later, a credit card statement arrived with charges from businesses I knew only as storefronts I passed, with pie tins cooling in their windows. A boutique I'd never entered. A hardware purchase larger than a man could carry. I went by to object. "We have a signature," the clerk said, and produced my name with the right imperial loops. It wasn't mine. It nearly was. Fighting the errors became a second job that didn't pay. When I thought I'd fixed a leak, another opened. Tom offered to loan me cash with a look that rejected the word loan in favor of the word neighbor. "We're braided here," he said. "You pull on one strand, the others feel it. Let us keep you from fraying." At night, I separated my saves into envelopes and wrote the amounts on the front in pencil, erasing and rewriting when I added a 5. I felt like a child playing store. The chimes counted 1. Across the street, a lamp switched off in a window, and then on again, a lighthouse telling you which rocks you'd already visited. A letter arrived from the real estate office. Given the softening interest and to prevent community whiplash, we're recommending a pause on showings. Community whiplash was a phrase I'd never heard and couldn't forget. It implied a neck, a sudden stop, a chiropractor's no hands. It implied a driver. I went for a run in the night because the town sleeps with its eyes open, but blinks more after 11. The air smelled like leaves learning to let go. On Maple Street, a porch light came on and then another, a string of pearls lighting as I passed, a runway guiding a plane that could only land here. When I got home, a paper bag rested on my step with a note pinned to it. "You forgot bananas." Inside was everything I had intended to buy that day without telling anyone I intended it. I looked up, and the street was empty, soft as wool. Chapter 12. The House That Heard Too Much. It is a special kind of relief to find evidence that your unease has weight. It is a special kind of dread to learn the evidence has a smile. I began tracing my own days like a surveyor. What time I left, which lights I turned on, who knocked and when. I put dots in a notebook and drew arrows between them until the arrows made a web that looked like a town parade route. On a Wednesday, the dotted line led me to the underside of a shelf in the parlor, where the molding had been restored neatly, so neatly. A little black eye stared back. I recognized the make from a product page I'd once clicked while buying a doorbell. One of those cameras meant for cabins and baby monitors and the parts of life that need a witness. There were 3 in the parlor, all hugs of corners. Another in the kitchen, disguised in the head of a screw. One above the back door, a coin in the ceiling. Each had been placed by hands that wanted to help. I took photos, so I'd believe myself later. Then I went next door, knocking like a person still hoping for a reasonable afternoon. Carol opened with a dish towel in hand. "Oh, good," she said. "I was about to bring over—" "There are cameras in my house," I said. "I didn't say your house. I didn't say our. Hidden ones. Her face multiplied emotions so quickly they became a new one. "Oh, Marcus," she said, and put the towel over her mouth for a second, like a child. "You noticed our little watchful friends?" She reached out and touched my forearm with 2 fingers. "For your safety." "What break-ins?" I asked, because the language suggested a past I hadn't been briefed on. "Before you moved," she said. "Teenagers in the empty place. We were watching the house for Mr. Aldridge. It seemed sensible to keep them for a while. You're still new." "Remove them," I said. I was surprised at how even my voice sounded. "Today?" She looked genuinely wounded, like I'd asked her to take down a smoke detector. "What if something happens?" she said. "What if you fall? What if you choke? How would we know?" "You wouldn't," I said. "That's the point." She did not cry. She did the other thing, the tiny nod, the tiny departure. "I'll speak to the mayor," she said. "We'll reassess. In the meantime, don't worry." I worried with a clarity that sharpened my edges. I called a police office 1 county over and explained, in the chilled way you explain a fever to a nurse who has seen 100 of them, that there were devices in my home I hadn't installed, that my neighbors had keys I hadn't given, that my yeses kept being annexed by other people's definitions. 2 officers came in a car that still held the smell of coffee. They listened in my parlor, notebooks out, while I showed them the little lenses. They nodded and hummed, and then they went to the mayor's office. When they came back, their faces had arranged themselves in a way that said, "We have been given another version that is more palatable." "Seems like a misunderstanding," one officer said kindly. "Small towns have their methods. They're looking out for you." "They're looking at me," I said. "Those are different verbs." "Take them down if you want," the officer said. "We can't stop them from being neighborly. Maybe you're adjusting." He didn't say poorly. He didn't have to. I stood on the porch while their car drove away. The street held still with the attention of a cat. A neighbor across the way raised a hand in a cautious wave, not wanting to interrupt. I nodded back. Later that night, I found the tires of my car softly dead, rubber chewed to threads that hadn't been there yesterday, not slashed, worn in a way that suggested the road had simply been generous in its friction. A note sat under the wiper, janitorial in its neatness. "Unsafe to drive. Tom's ordered new ones. Payment plan okay?" I looked up at the dark windows and saw the town's reflection in the glass of my own. I drove to a library in another town the next morning, careful on the spare, careful in my eyes. The librarian stamped my guest pass with a thump that felt like a passport. I sat at a public machine with a squeaky space bar and hired a private investigator through a site designed to make that sound normal. I used a fake email and the name of the first dog I loved. The form asked for details. I wrote, "Find Richard Aldridge. He left Millbrook." A week later, the PI sent me a message. "We have him. Boston. Shelter on Tremont. Not stable, but there." It was the first sentence in weeks that felt like a door opening. Title, The Kindness of Neighbors, Chapter 13. Boston, Threadbare and True Boston met me with a salt wind, and the kind of winter light that makes everything an honest color. The shelter on Tremont had a bulletin board crowded with handwriting, the sort of crowd that feels friendlier than it is. A volunteer with a ring of keys listened while I fumbled my reasons and then nodded toward a cafeteria where the coffee smelled like effort. Richard Aldridge sat at a table in the far corner, wrapped in a jacket that had forgotten its shape. His beard had organized itself into a map of different grays. His eyes were the only bright thing about him, small lamps behind a dirty window. He glanced up when I said his name, and he looked like a man in a story who recognizes his last line coming. "I bought your house," I said softly, palms empty on the table, like I was showing him I hadn't brought a weapon or a debt. He smiled, and for a second I saw a photograph of him from before, raising a paper cup at a barbecue, all the world in front of him, as if it were a friendly porch. Then the smile folded. "Did you?" he said. He rubbed his thumb along the rim of his cup, a nervous little prayer. "Do they know you're here?" "They know everything," I said, and it wasn't a joke. He nodded as if I'd identified a species. "They're not bad people," he said. "That's the hook. Everyone thinks horror comes with knives." He leaned in. His breath was coffee and mint, the charity kind. "In Millbrook, knives are rude. Smiles aren't." I told him about the cameras in the parlor, the casseroles, how apologies had become a currency with a wild exchange rate. He listened like he'd paid for this exact conversation and wanted to get his money's worth. When I finished, he tapped the table twice with his knuckles. "You know how a spider plant sends off little babies?" he asked. "Every windowsill gets a pot. Every pot gets company. It's sweet until the shelf breaks." "I'm trying to leave," I said. "Or I was. The town keeps catching the hem of my coat." He looked toward the door and then past it, as if he could see the road to Vermont, like a cord stretched between us. "I left 7 times, he said. "That's not bravado. That's confession. I left the way a child runs away to the backyard. They were always there with lemonade." His voice softened. "The worst time, no yelling, no locking anything. I got 20 miles, and Tom pulled up like an angel from a Christmas pageant. Big hands, big grin. 'Lucky I found you,' he said. We rode back in the tow like it was a parade." "Did they mean to trap you?" I asked. I heard the hunger in my own question. He stared at the ceiling long enough that a fluorescent light flickered in sympathy. "No," he said finally. "They meant to keep me safe. Sometimes those are the same thing when you stand in the right place." He dug in his jacket and brought out a spiral notebook whose cover had been peeled and restuck enough times that it had learned the shape of his hand. He slid it across to me. His name bloomed on the first page in a tidy older penmanship. Below, dates, times, addresses, arrows, little diagrams of streets. "Map," he said simply. "Of them, of me, how they work. You'll think I'm paranoid in places, and I won't argue, but even the paranoid keep time." I paged through. His notes were calm. That's what unseated me. No red underlines, no exclamation points, just the steady accountant's truth of who knocked when, who always happened to be at which corner at which hour, which volunteer manned which desk on which day, what information could be coaxed from the school secretary if you praised her lilacs first. Shift coverage, one page read, then a tidy grid. Early risers, Nora, Mrs. Chen. Midday floaters, Diane, pastor. Evening porch lights, Tom Ortega, night walkers. Mills, Gaines's nephew. Night chimes, another page, followed by a sketch of the belfry and a note. Carol says 11 is the loneliest hour. Watch who walks then. "They'll call the people you love," he said. "They'll call your ex, your mother if she'll answer, your friend from college, and they'll sound so decent those people will be grateful to have someone keeping a track of you. Decency is a double knot. It holds. Why me? I asked, and it came out smaller than I wanted. Why us? Why do we fit their hands so well? He spread his fingers on the table as if he were measuring a board. We came alone, he said. We came wounded and quiet. We were easy to bless. He looked at me, and something like apology moved across his face. Their economy needs us too, he added. Not the money, the roles, a project, a weak heart to strengthen, a lost lamb to corral gently. How did you get out? I said. He laughed one soft bark. I didn't, he said, then shook his head at himself. No, that's not quite right. I left my name there. I left my accounts, my car, my guilt. I left my sense of being understood. I walked out of myself and kept walking until I was a person Millbrook wouldn't recognize at a glance. He touched the notebook. I mailed this to myself 6 times before it arrived. They open forgeries with more care than real mail. That's a trick. Can I? It's yours, he said. If you use it, if you don't, leave it in the library where the chimes can't hear it. We stood outside under a spill of cold light, and he pressed a paper into my hand, an address written in his careful print. Friend in Somerville, he said. If you lose your feet, they'll lend you theirs for a week. What did they send you? I asked, and he looked ashamed for reasons that weren't his fault. Cards, he said, on holidays, on nothing days. They tell me I'm forgiven. They ask me to come home. He leaned close. His beard smelled faintly of old soap. Don't tell him where I am. I promised. On the ride back, I held the notebook like a warm thing and let the bus rock me the way a careful neighbor might. Vermont's hills rose as the light failed. Millbrook waited where the road curved in with its porch lights already on. Chapter 14, The Book of Keeping. I laid Aldrich's notebook on my dining table and gave it the respect of a clear surface. The first page was a confession in a neat hand. I overwatered the garden. I killed 3 houseplants with love. The sentence looked like a joke until you let it sit. I copied his grid into my own notebook and added a column, because that's what you do when you're trying to turn a culture into data. Early risers, midday floaters, evening porch lights, night walkers, and then my column, telltales, small ticks. Carol's cardigan buttons askew when she's tired. Tom scratches his jaw when he's telling you a half-truth. The mayor balances his hat in both hands when he's delivering a line he's delivered before. I tested small boundaries to confirm the pattern. I left the porch light off 3 nights running. Mrs. Chen mentioned it on her morning walk on day 4 with a touch of worry, as expected. I closed my curtains during the pancake breakfast. Pastor Mills knocked afterward with a Tupperware and a gentle mention of the old house's need for light. I skipped a Wednesday cleanup. By nightfall, my recycling bin had been rolled to the curb by an unseen hand, and the calendar on my fridge sported a circle around next Wednesday. I took the cameras down one by one and placed them in a shoebox by the door with a note in my own compact hand. Not needed. Within a day the box had gone, and a hole in the ceiling had been stuffed with a neat wooden plug that matched the molding as if it had always been part of the house. The shoebox returned later with a loaf of bread inside like we had traded customs. In the school computer lab, a 6th grader asked me why adults want to know everything. Because they're scared, I said before I could put a softer wrapper on it. He nodded solemnly, as if I'd confirmed a suspicion, and went back to making his pixel dog jump. I called the out-of-county police again, and this time I said the words like a mantra: unauthorized surveillance, interference with sale, possible financial manipulation. The officer's tone had the measured warmth of a person holding a cup they didn't want to spill. "We can set a mediation," he said, "with the mayor. It's always better to resolve locally." Locally was the problem. A letter arrived addressed in block letters to me with no return. "We take care of our own. If you're ours, let us. If you're not, that's all right." The last sentence was a kindness and a threat negotiated into a truce. At the library, in that basement where the clippings whisper to one another when no one's there, I found a photo from 1973 of a barbecue behind a grange. I knew most of the faces by their descendants. One man stared at the camera with a smile painted on and eyes that weren't included in the deal. Thomas Kern, the caption benevolently declared, "Enjoying Appreciation Day." I traced his name with a finger that came away gray from old ink. Kern died here in 1989, a beloved member. The town grieves well. It's good at endings that let everyone speak. I put the notebook in a drawer I locked, then hid the key under the 4th floorboard, not the 3rd, because I'd seen a movie once where it was always the 3rd. I saved cash in an envelope that I tucked inside the bottom liner of a potted plant. I bought a bus ticket on a computer in the next town while pretending to browse quilt patterns. I wrapped my quiet in plain paper. When I told my face in the mirror that I would leave at 3 in the morning on a Tuesday, my face tried on the expression and found it plausible. The chimes aren't programmed for 3, that's another trick. I kept my gratitude intact on the outside. I fixed the library Wi-Fi when it sulked. I complimented Diane's lemon bars and meant it. I waved at Mr. Ortega and asked after his knees. I said "we" when I meant "you." I held my eyes like warm stones in my pocket and didn't take them out where anyone could see. On the night before I was meant to slip out, I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and watched the dim ceiling and told myself that the same people who could hold you in place could also keep you from falling through it. It helped and didn't. Chapter 15, The Party with No Birthday. At 2:30 in the morning, the house has a delicate sound. Pipes considering, a mouse reviewing its roots, wind nursing a leaf back into quiet. I packed a single bag in that hush and left the rest of my life propped around the rooms like decoys. The bus ticket sat with my cash and a spare phone in the inside pocket of my coat. I drank water. I stood in the kitchen one last time and touched the mug on the hook above the stove. I told it thank you, which is a silly thing to tell a mug, but it had held my mornings. At 3, I put my hand on the back doorknob. "Surprise!" shouted my house. Light bloomed in the parlor, then in the kitchen, and faces filled the doorway with the shining, pleased look of people who have executed a plan. Balloons joggled up to the ceiling like startled fish. There were banners, hand-cut letters taped into a message, "We love you." Carol had a party hat already on her head, askew, as if she'd run to put it there in time. Tom held a cake with 3 candles lit, not because it was my birthday, but because 3 is a good number for wishes. "We knew you were feeling down," Diane said, pressing a plate into my stunned hands. "We thought we'd keep you company," finished the mayor, stepping in with a grin that wondered whether I'd think this was charming. No one should be alone at 3 in the morning, It's a lonesome hour. I looked at the clock. I looked at the door. The word bus inflated and popped in my chest. I tried to locate anger and found something like grief borrowing its shoes. How did you? We can tell, Carol said, and her eyes shone the way kindness does when it's working hard. Your lights, your recycling, the time you took to breathe on the porch at midnight. Those are signs. We read signs in Millbrook, were very good at reading. People drifted past, setting down casseroles with midnight smiles, plugging in a speaker that played a playlist labeled Marcus, Cheerful, Not Loud. The cake tasted like it wanted to be my favorite. The chimes counted 3 like they were making a wish with me. We danced the kind of wonky dance you do when no one wants to shake the house. The party lingered the way syrup does, slow, sweet, covering edges. At 2:59 I could have run. At 3:15 it would have been rude. At 4 the bus had gone. At 4:30 Nora pressed me to eat something so I wouldn't be shaky later. At 5 the sky remembered morning. When they filtered out, they did it with a choreographed care I had to admire. Rest now, the pastor said, rolling a trash bag and tying it neatly. Grief likes to pretend it needs motion. Let it be still. After the door closed, I stood in the empty kitchen with paper streamers catching tiny gusts from the vent and tried to put my patience back on like a coat. A text arrived from the bus company. Temporary suspension. Routes to Boston delayed. We apologize. I didn't answer. I sat in a chair and watched light gradually find the edges of the table. Later, Tom came by just to check the spare, and I let him, because not letting him would be the beginning of a fight I couldn't finish. You know we love you, right? He said, crouched by the tire. Not the sticky way, the way light loves a window. Windows don't have to stay, I said before I could stop myself. Sure, he said, and tightened a lug nut. But a house without any is a box. Chapter 16, The Exit Lined with Flags. When the festival came, I chose joy like camouflage. I carried folding chairs with Tom and let the plastic cut my palms. I poured lemonade for strangers and measured the sugar with ridiculous discipline as if I could sweeten everything just to the line and not a grain more. I laughed in the right places. When Diane's face glowed with satisfaction at some small joke, I let myself like that glow because it was human and present, because punishment should never be my first language. The notebook in my pocket had a map of the county printed small. I'd penciled a route that slid around the usual roads. Aiden helped hang bunting and didn't notice me slip a second set of keys into my sleeve. A decoy for the day I need to leave this porch without feeling the weight of the metal ring. At dusk, the whole town breathed in and held, the way crowds do before fireworks. Music drifted from the bandstand, gentle, unremarkable, as if the songs had been scraped smooth by years of hands. At the moment the first Roman candle hissed, I took my chance. I stepped between booths, nodded at the pastor, smiled at Nora, and walked to my car. The spare had been replaced. The invoice said, neighbor discount in a hand meant to soothe. I started the engine. It turned over clean. The road out of town passes a field that looks like it's thinking about being a lake. Beyond that, a stand of birches learn how to be ghosts. I kept my hands light on the wheel and my breath in the smallest part of my chest. The first 10 miles were a string. The second 10, a hope. At the 20th, I let my shoulders drop a fraction. I reached to turn up the radio, and the engine hiccuped like it had swallowed wrong. Sugar does a kind of work in the wrong places. I didn't know that then, not as chemistry, only as a small gasp and a stutter, and then quiet. The car rolled its eyes, coasted, and came to stop at the gravel lip of a ditch that had never asked to be helpful. I sat a long minute with my hand on the key. The world made its wider sounds, the far roam of a truck, crickets that had never heard of Millbrook. 2 headlights appeared in the mirror and approached with the convincing inevitability of everything. Tom's old pickup, paint worn to a proud dullness, pulled in behind me. He climbed out with that same big grin that makes people trust him with ladders. "Lucky I came along," he said like a line we've both marked our places with. He peered under my hood and made the noises of a man who has seen this kind of story before. "We'll tow you back, no trouble. I'll get you sorted." "I can call a service," I said, making it sound like an adventure. "Why would you?" he said, and there was genuine confusion there, like I proposed using a spoon to cut firewood. "We're right here." The tow rope took the weight. The pickup pulled the car like a child with a wagon. I watched the birches slide backward, the would-be lake hold its breath, the sky turn the color of a bruise that had already learned to heal. Tom leaned out the window at a stop sign and said, "We'll get you fixed, then you can enjoy the rest of the festival. Everyone's asking after you." At home, Carol had left her porch light on in the shape of a halo. She met us on the walk with a dish towel and a concern that had a little ribbon tied on it. "We were just wondering," she said. "Here you are." "I went for air," I said. She patted my shoulder as if clearing crumbs. "You can open the windows for that," she said. "It's what they're for." I slept that night with the notebook under my pillow, a childish superstition, expecting it to whisper a new plan. It did not. I dreamt of Kern in the picnic photo, smile waxy, and woke calmer than that image deserved. The chimes counted 4. I lay there listening to them and thought, as kindly as I could, I will have to be smaller until I am gone, or I will have to be larger than I am. Title: The Kindness of Neighbors. Chapter 17, Counseling Hours. The day after Tom towed me home like a memory, the town shifted to a new key. It wasn't punishment, not exactly. It was concern with a clipboard. Pastor Mills began, arriving just before lunch, the time a person is easiest to say yes to. He had a notebook with a pen loop and a habit of sitting where he could see both the door and the window. "Just checking in," he'd say, adjusting his glasses. "These weeks can be tender." We didn't pray. We scheduled feelings. "How was your morning on a scale of 1 to 10? What do you think your sleep is trying to tell you?" He never took offense when I said that it wants me to sleep. He wrote that down like a good answer. Carol switched to 3 meals a day, each in a container I'd recognize anywhere now. Labels in tidy script. Noon, protein, light, supper, iron-rich, snack, gentle. She tapped the labels as if they were a promise, the way a nurse taps a syringe to lift the air. "You get shaky when you don't eat," she said. "I can tell." She looked at my hands as if they were new birds she intended to tame with sugar. Neighbors began pausing longer in front of the house, their glances bright with assignment. Mr. Ortega offered to walk my route with me, so the knees get jealous. Nora left a stack of glossy magazines on my porch. Gardening or woodworking, A regional history with a cover photo of the Grange lit up like a beating heart. It helps to have projects, her note said. Idle minds mistake kindness for traps. My phone rang with my ex-wife's name. They called me, she said, before I could apologize for existing. The background was her kitchen. The same blue kettle I'd bought her the year the handle on the old one gave up. They said you're spiraling. She made it sound like a polite spin class. Are you safe? I am surrounded, I said. This sounded, even to me, like the wrong kind of poetry. They care, she said. They made a point of saying they care. Marcus, maybe let them help until you feel steadier. Would you, I asked, like to be helped that way? She sighed in the sweet, exasperated way that had been a wallpaper in our marriage. You were always so allergic to the word we, she said. Maybe you moved to the cure. The school doubled my hours in the lab. The kids were gentle and loud all at once. You look tired, Aiden said, handing me a laptop that had been dropped and forgiven. My mom says fresh air cures everything, and omelets. He looked pleased to have solved me. In the evenings, my doorbell rang and rang in a rhythm that began to feel like a breathing exercise. I sat with people on my porch who told me about their surgeries, their daughters, their memories of winters when the snow had a different personality. None of them asked what I planned to do next. They asked how they could keep me upright long enough to meet the next festival. Gentleness can sand you down. I could feel my edges becoming round. I found myself explaining things to the mirror. Boundaries like museum ropes. The difference between touch and hold. The fact that a person is allowed to be a door sometimes, and sometimes a wall, and sometimes a window you can see through but not open. The mirror listened and offered back a man who looked like he had chosen a small room because the quiet there was easier to read. When I tried to skip past the mills on a Tuesday, left the porch light dark, kept the shades half drawn, he knocked anyway, then waited without knocking again. He has a patient stillness. It fills a house the way fog fills a field. Suddenly, you're in it, and it is not unkind. We can make a different time, he said when I opened the door. It matters less when than that. I wanted to say, it matters that it's mine. Instead, I asked him if he remembered Thomas Kern. He nodded once, careful. A complicated man. He left suddenly, I said. He passed, the pastor said, adjusting the verb like a blanket. We were good to him. He was good to us. I pictured a photo in the basement, the smile that looked like it had borrowed someone else's mouth. What does good mean? It means no one is alone, he said, and the sentence was so clean it could slide under a locked door. That night, I dreamed of a room with soft walls, not the padded kind, the quilted kind. Every patch was a favor sewn to another, a meal stitched to a ride anchored to a key. I slept well inside that quilt and woke with a heavy sadness I had trouble blaming on anybody. Chapter 18. Ink that doesn't fade. I went back to the library basement because paper doesn't argue. It just waits to be read correctly. The humidifier hummed like an old chorus line in the corner, and the fluorescent light flickered the way it does only on days that already feel thin. I pulled the Millbrook binders one by one, the spines labeled in ballpoint 950 to 59, 960 to 69, and let decades make their case. There were photos of potlucks where the same punch bowl traveled through time, bridal showers in which the ribbons in 1964 became the ribbons in 1982, parades of children who looked like their grandparents pretending. In every group shot, my eye learned to find the one face held a fraction too tight, the person being loved past a point of comfort. Kern, with his wax smile, a woman named Helena, whose caption read, "Our Sunbeam," and whose gaze went a little to the left of the camera. Mr. Aldridge at a 4th of July table, a paper hat perched obediently on his head, his hands folded like a prayer he couldn't say. Minutes from meetings, noted generosity as if inscribing it could keep it pure. Voted unanimously to extend support to the Webb household. One sheet from my month read, already filed as if history couldn't wait to happen. Rotations adjusted to ensure no gaps. The tidy script had the cheerful firmness of a kindergarten teacher's notes to parents. I touched the page, then rubbed my finger and thought absurdly of fingerprints. It's flattering to imagine the record will remember your touch. In a file labeled Chimes, I found the maintenance log for the belfry bell. The repairs were scheduled around events that kept the town's heart beating. Festivals, funerals, welcome suppers. Someone, years ago, had jotted a note in the margin. Carol's girl's first tooth rang 11 extra. The chimes do not mark only hours here. They measure the town's pulse. 11 made me think of Carol's comment in Aldridge's notebook, the loneliest hour. I wondered who had been watched most carefully at 11. Behind the clippings sat a manila folder stamped with the year 1989. Inside, a newspaper column written in the hushed tone of public grief. Thomas Kern, beloved, dead at home. A paragraph on his faithfulness to community. The words were soft as bread. There was no mention of what he'd tried to be besides beloved. There never is. We are what we are to others on paper. That's part of the trap. On my way up the basement steps, I caught sight of myself in a rippled pane of glass and almost didn't recognize the posture. I had been bending my shoulders to fit. The mirror offered me back a possibility. Straighten. I did. It felt like insisting in a foreign language. Outside, the air had that smell of cut grass, pretending it didn't hurt. The mayor stood by the notice board reading a flyer about the next food drive like a man practicing concern. He turned as if we'd arranged to meet. "Marcus," he said, "I've been hoping for a word." "I've found minutes with my name in them," I said. "From last week." "Transparency," he said, as if I'd complimented the glass. "We prefer it." "I didn't vote?" "We did," he said, "on your behalf." He put both hands on his hat brim. "We want to help you accept what is good for you. There are people who don't get this kind of net. They fall right through the gaps in the world." He gestured at the tidy street, the brick, the benches painted by school children. "We close the gaps. That's what a town is. What if I don't want to be caught? Then we make sure you don't drown." He smiled, gentle, at a precise angle. "It's not elegant. It is effective." In the grocery, the cashier slid my milk across the scanner and said, "We miss you on Thursdays." And I knew without asking that someone had written me into Thursdays again. On my porch, a copy of the community calendar waited with a circle around the library's repair day and a small note, "Marcus." The exclamation points felt like a row of little fences I hadn't asked for, but would have to open one by one. That evening, I wrote for a long time. Lines that were not planned so much as descriptions, the way a map is not the road, but can keep you from walking into a lake. "If you are reading this," I began, not because I knew who would, but because the phrase steadies a person by pretending to be useful. Here's how it works. Here's how it will convince you it is love. I listed the casseroles, the cameras, the phrases that look like gifts. We're just worried. We'll take it from here. No one should be alone at 2 a.m. I wrote until the chimes decided to call it 11 and then 12. I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer and locked it and put the key under the 4th board. The 4th, I told myself again, as if repetition were a spell. Chapter 19. The Terms of Care. The mayor arrived after dark with the courtesy of a man who knows he'll be invited in regardless. He carried his hat and the softest smile in town. On my table, Carol's supper sat under foil like a warm secret. The house had the too bright look of a place that has been tidied for company so the company won't notice the mess in the drawers. He took the chair by the window, and I sat across, the wooden key between us like a little warrant. He turned it once with 2 fingers, admiring, not proprietary. "You've been busy," he said. "I hear the routers sing your praises." "I'm leaving," I said, "because sometimes you have to put the noun first and let the verb scramble." He weighed that. "You can," he said. "Of course, we're not a prison." He smiled in a way that asked me to agree with him out loud. I didn't. He continued, "But I hope you'll stay long enough to understand what we mean when we say we take care of our own. Your generation, a phrase people my age are allergic to, is very brave at cutting ropes, less brave at learning which ones keep a tent standing." I had a job, I said. I had a girlfriend who thought in full sentences without asking permission. I had a car that ran. Now I have a casserole schedule and a town meeting where my name appears in minutes before I speak. "And community," he said, "and people who know when you're shaky and don't make you prove it, and a choir of chimes that keep your hours even when you forget to." He clasped his hands. "We're not monsters. We're just organized care." He tilted his head. "You met Mr. Aldridge." I kept my face smooth. "I found his notebook," I said. "He was sick," the mayor said, "and the word hung in the room like a smell you can't quite place. We tried. We always try." He couldn't accept it. "Accept what?" "That he wasn't better alone." The mayor rested his forearms on the table and looked at me the way you look at someone you're about to invite to speak at a graduation. "This country is dying of solitude. We have a cure. It isn't pretty. It works." "It works for you?" I said. "It can work for you," he said, "if you stop punching the water." He stood and looked around the room as if cataloging what the town had done here. Curtains hemmed, a shelf steadied, a life held in place by 100 invisible thumbs. He put the wooden key back on the table very gently, like a doctor returning an heirloom watch. "We are patient. Eventually, everyone understands. Everyone stays. And if they don't adapt..." He smiled the smile you use when you don't want to alarm a child. "Millbrook takes care of its own, forever." He left without asking for anything but the acknowledgement that the door had worked. I watched his shadow leave the gate and gather itself into the street. The chimes counted 9, as if they'd been paid to. On the step, a paper bag waited with bananas and a note. "You forgot these again." The again had 3 underlines. I ate one because I was hungry, and because stubbornness is a fine trait that doesn't fill a stomach. While I stood there chewing, I realized the horror wasn't the certainty of being stopped. It was the town's confidence that none of this qualified as stopping. They would smile and take my plate and pass me a fresh one and call it a victory for us all. I washed the peel down the disposal and listened to the blades practice their short sermon on what is and isn't edible. Then I went upstairs and opened the locked drawer and wrote. The method is patience. The method is paperwork. The method is a phone tree with perfect pitch. The method is love that has voted on the boundaries beforehand. I slept like a person who has decided to be fluent in 2 languages, the language of belonging and a language of escape, and knows it will fray his mouth. In the morning, the sun came in at the angle it always does, and for a second the house looked like it had when I first arrived, humane and possible. I stood in that second and let it touch me and then pass. Title: The Kindness of Neighbors. Chapter 20. The narrow door, days started to stack tidy again, like plates I was afraid to chip. I learned the choreography so well I could dance it without looking at my feet. I waved first, I volunteered early. If the town were a fabric, I let myself be a thread that didn't snag. On the outside, I was the version of myself they could fold. On the inside, I kept a second ledger. Lines like, spoke to cashier about rain. She said, we'll cover you Wednesday, unprompted. Carol moved my mug back to the second shelf, returned it to the hook when I touched the handle with my palm. Flat. 3 seconds. A signal she interpreted as agreement. Pastor skipped a day. Porch light burned late at Nora's. Someone else's worry took the night shift. Small freedoms lived in the seams. I left the back door propped 2 inches and timed how long it took a neighbor to text that my lock had forgotten itself. 7 minutes on a Tuesday, 11 on a Sunday. I drove the long way to the school and counted who waved, began to know which faces meant look out and which meant rarely, quietly, permission. Mr. Ortega gave me one of those nods, small and private, the kind that says, I remember wanting something else. I didn't capitalize it as hope. I filed it as weather. In the lab, a girl named Lila asked why routers have little feet. So they can pretend to run, she said, answering herself. I laughed, and the sound startled me. It felt unrecorded. I held it a second too long like a warm coin. The house softened me without asking. I began to like the way the floor complained on the 5th step. I liked the sting of the air by the lilacs at dusk. I liked the chimes when they remembered a celebration and let a wrong number ring. On a Tuesday at 2, they rang 9 times in quick succession. Later, the bulletin board said Mrs. Patterson had come home from surgery. Ring extra for mending, someone had written. The town's kindness sounded like a bell, even when it was a fence. At night, I still wrote. I kept my handwriting even, my tone patient. I said what the days wouldn't let me say out loud, that affection can be a harness. If the buckles never unfasten, that watching isn't the same as seeing, that a person is not a community project and still belongs somewhere. I folded the pages and slid them into the locked drawer as if I were feeding a small animal that hid from light. Once, near midnight, I carried the notebook to the porch and read a paragraph out loud to the dark to see if speaking it made it truer. The air listened. So did someone across the street. A curtain breathed, then stilled. I kept my voice low after that, not in fear so much as in proportion. Whisper to a whisper. Meet it where it is. On a Friday, the mayor found me adjusting the router in the Grange and leaned against the stage with the ease of a man who thinks stages are for leaning when speeches aren't scheduled. "You're fitting," he said warmly, as if complimenting his shirt. "Feels good, doesn't it?" "It feels clear," I said. "Clarity," he said, nodding. "That's a luxury most folks never find." He watched me tape down a cable so dancers wouldn't trip. "You're one of us," he added carefully, like a doctor delivering a diagnosis meant to land softly. "You don't have to make that official," I said. "Oh," he said, delighted. "We already did." When he left, I stood in the empty hall and looked at the truss of the ceiling and the gentle sway of the old curtains and thought, there are rooms that keep their promises, even when the people in them do not. I stayed there a while, nose full of dust and lemon oil, until the chimes remembered what hour it was, and I could pretend they were answering. Chapter 21. 6 months, smoothed over the snow, took its time, then gave up all at once. Spring erased its tracks with a green sleeve. 6 months marked themselves without confetti. The calendar said we had met ourselves again. My face, in shop windows, agreed. I stood at the Grange podium with a clipboard and a pen that clicked too loudly when I was nervous. "Welcome committee updates," I said, and my voice surprised me with its warmth. I meant it. Kindness is a muscle. It builds with use. It can also crowd out other movements if you never stretch. Carol was moving in with her daughter 2 streets over, same green shutters, better gutters. The Brennan house would be empty a beat, then not. "We've got a prospect," the realtor said, head tipped, as if listening to the future through a wall. Solid offer. We organized like people who had never learned to do otherwise. Baskets, routes, casserole rotations, who would handle locks, who would take first watch without calling it that. I wrote names. I remembered being the name. When the vote came, should the spare be presented at the town meeting or on the porch, I didn't speak. My pen hovered above the paper and drew a small circle that meant nothing. Someone else said porch. Everyone nodded the way schools do when a lesson has been given many times and still feels deserved. I slept through one chime for the first time since I'd arrived and could not decide if this was victory or drift. The mug on the hook didn't creak when I lifted it. The 5th stair complained, or maybe it blessed me. My ear can't tell any more. In the mirror, I had the expression of a man who knows when the bakery puts out warm loaves and when the train pulls past the station and whether Mrs. Chen's ankles will need sitting down by 4. Deep knowing is not the same as peace. It is, however, lighter to carry than constant fight. In the school courtyard, Lila and Aiden practiced a skit. "We're the welcome," Lila announced, paper crown tilted. "We're the doorbell," Aiden said, ringing an invisible bell 3 times. The teacher clapped, earnest and tired. "Big voices," she said, "gentle hands." At the committee table, Tom slid me the roster and smiled like a man who genuinely loved assigning himself to heavy lifting. "Brennan House gets sun in the morning," he said. "We'll plant the ferns where she can see them from the sink. Makes everything feel easier." I nodded and wrote ferns. It was a good note. It was also a leash if you followed it far enough. I followed it to the edge and then set the pen down because the meeting needed me to nod again. Chapter 22. The Doorway Smile. She arrived on a day the town had decided was properly spring. Windows hung open like tongues tasting weather. Her car rolled past the lilacs and paused, as if asking permission in a language it hadn't learned yet. She sat there a breath, 2, then cut the engine. In the passenger seat, a banker's box with a sweater balanced on top. The sweater's color had the exact humility of good laundry. She was younger than me by a thin handful of years, hair pinned up like a promise she didn't quite believe, face in that brave, tired place grown people get to when they've left somewhere on purpose. The realtor stood on the walk with a key in her palm as if she were giving communion. I crossed the street with lemonade and cookies because that is what we do, and because my hands were good at it. The tray didn't shake. "Welcome to Millbrook," I said. I tasted the line as I spoke it. It tasted like sugar and rehearsals. "I'm Marcus, across the way. If you need a ladder or a socket set, or the name of someone who knows what these old pipes like to hear first, I have you." Her name was Naomi. She said it like a new shirt you're not sure you can wear to work yet. "Hi," she said. Thank you." She glanced at the tray and then at me, careful. "I want to get boxes inside before the weather remembers. It can be moody." "Of course," I said. "We'll give you space, but we're here if you need anything." The sentence fit my mouth. It also scraped the roof of it like toast. I smiled because that helped the scraping fade. Diane crossed with flowers, Nora with a loaf, Tom with the look of a man who can make a couch levitate through a door it doesn't fit. Carol, visiting, rested a hand on my arm and whispered, "You'll show her the ropes." I looked at the rope in my mind, the knots I had learned. I felt the tug my muscle knew to yield to. Naomi said lightly, "I'm a remote worker. I chose quiet. I'd like—" She trailed off, not wanting to be rude to kindness when it has your address in its hand. "Privacy," I said softly, not just to relieve her of the word, but to remind myself it existed. "We'll go slow." I turned to the group without turning to them, kept my body angled toward her, a small pact. "Let her settle," I said. "First week's for breathing." They meant to honor it. They also meant to be themselves. By nightfall, a basket would find her porch anyway. Batteries, a calendar with stars next to potlucks, a directory with her name already printed. This is what happens to a tide. It comes in, even if you ask it to reconsider. When I set the tray on her counter, I saw the small things a person brings when they intend to make a place alive. The chipped mixing bowl, the plant that survived 3 apartments, the photo of her and someone's shoulder we'd meet in a story later. I wanted her to keep all of it. That desire made me good and poor at my job. As I left, I noticed her keys on the counter, 2 brass, 1 dull silver. No spare sat apart, waiting to go to a friendly hand. When I reached the porch, the wooden step sighed. "Do you need a spare made?" I heard myself ask, and hated the shape of the question even as I loved its usefulness. "Our hardware store is fast." She smiled, wary and polite. "Not yet," she said. "I've been locked out before. It taught me." "Of course," I said again, and the words felt like being told not to pick at a scab. Chapter 23. Night Ledger. I went home and set the empty tray on the counter and listened to the house, remember the sound of a new neighbor's name. The chimes counted 6, then made a mistake and counted 7, then corrected themselves quietly, embarrassed. I love that. The humility of an object keen to do its job. In my desk, the drawer lock turned with the same small resistance it always gave, like a friend who wants you to insist. I pulled out the notebook and wrote a new page for Naomi. "If you find this, I am sorry you needed to. Start with the door. Keep it yours. People will bring you food. Let them. People will bring you opinions. Put them on the porch to air. I wrote what Aldrich had written to me without knowing. How the phone tree sings in thirds. How the pastor measures his silences to make room for yours. How the mayor's hands on his hat mean the conversation is traveling an old road. I wrote about the lily pads you can step on without sinking. The school lab. The library's quiet. Mr. Ortega's good advice about snow tires, even in months when snow is a rumor. I wrote, if you need to leave, be small first. Then be a storm only on the day you have to. The town won't see that you're weather until you're already over the hills. When the page was full, I slid the notebook back and pressed the wood flat. On the screen of my laptop, I let the real estate sites open like a forbidden hymn book. Listings in other states, towns where the word community meant a street fair twice a year and not a bloodstream. I studied the photos the way a boy studies a map of places with dragons at the margins. The dragons didn't scare me anymore. The margins did. The phone rang. Carol's name. Just checking, she said. New neighbors unsettle the water. It will settle. It always does, I said, and made my voice warm because I needed her warmth too. We talked about the lilacs and the school fundraiser and how weather lies for living in April. When we hung up, I stood a while with the receiver in my hand as if it had opinions to add and decided that no one object in my house was my enemy. A knock, soft and unpersuaded, came at the door. I slid the notebook into the drawer by reflex, like a child doing the wrong thing quickly. I opened the door to Tom and a casserole that smelled like Sunday. Thought you might be hungry, he said. His smile was kind. I believe that. I saw the welcome went well. Slowly, I said, and he nodded approval as at a recipe followed properly. We ate on the porch with our knees turned toward the street. He told me a story about losing a hammer in the mud and finding it 2 years later exactly where his hand remembered. I told him about a router that liked to be unplugged and plugged in twice, not once, and how some machines prefer ritual. We agreed machines aren't the only things. When he left, the sky was that quiet blue that shows up after people have promised to go to bed. I stood at the window a while and let the town see me see it. Then I drew the curtain. Not a slam, just a suggestion. And the fabric made that small hush sound that always feels like choosing. Epilogue. A gentle afterglow. The Brennan house shed its echo and learned Naomi's footsteps. The chimes practiced her hours, missed once, apologized. The welcome basket, the calendar, the hand-carved key lay on her table like options, not orders. She took the calendar. She left the key where it could watch. The town accepted this with patience that had centuries on its side. 6 months later, at a meeting under banners the children had painted, my pen found its column and waited. We planned a yard cleanup, a bake sale, a quiet check-in for a man 2 streets over who had stopped answering his phone. Community, in its best costume, looks like these lists. It also looks like the pause we forgot to practice. I tried, in small places, to teach the pause. I failed often. Failing gently still counts. That night, alone, I opened the locked drawer and reread the pages from the day I tried to leave. Bus tickets, cash, a fake name, lessons learned like splinters worked out with a needle, all outdated now. I slid them into a folder labeled "For Later." because a human being deserves a drawer full of later, even if he never opens it. On the screen, I let listings glow. I scrolled through other kitchens, other porches, other stairs that would learn where to creak. It wasn't disloyalty. It was a muscle staying warm. I closed the laptop when the chimes touched 10. I wrote the last line I could afford to write that night. If you're reading this, you're probably already in the slow water. There is a way to float that is not the same as drowning. Learn it. Keep your toes pointed toward shore, even while you wave to the people on land. A knock, gentle as bread, came at the door. I slid the notebook away. I opened to Tom and a casserole warm enough to make the air in the hall delicious. "Thought you might be hungry," he said, like a refrain. "Always," I said, and took the dish in both hands. We stood there a second, two men practicing a skill old as fields, carrying weight together without talking about the weight. He left. The door clicked itself closed. The house exhaled. I set the casserole on the stove and looked through the window. People walked. They waved. I waved back. The smile did not reach my eyes. That's all right. Some smiles do their best work quietly. In another window, across the street, Naomi moved past with a book in her hand. She looked up, saw me looking, and lifted the book a little as if to say, "I'm learning the language." I lifted my hand in a small hello that also meant, "I'll translate when you need." Later, the screensaver on my laptop tossed squares of other lives across black. A listing in another state, a house at the edge of a town that swore it minded its business, lingered a second longer than the rest. I watched it the way you watch a train you might someday board. Then I let it go. I turned out the light. The chimes measured the hour. I slept as if something were holding me, which it was. I slept like a person who had learned uneasily that sometimes the only way out tonight is through morning. Final. Title card. The kind you might imagine if you needed one. The house at 47 Maple Street, Millbrook Valley, Vermont, listed for sale again in 2024. It sold in 3 days under market value to a single buyer seeking a quiet place to start over. And the chimes, of course, remembered to ring.